One of the things that I tell people is that information is only one way to add value, and we can't rely just on delivering information in order to sell, in order to get more engagement, in order to build an audience. There are so many different ways to add value inside of someone's life. In fact, one of those ways is around raising awareness. It's making people aware of mistakes they're making that they may not have been aware of. And that's what this episode is all about. In fact, one of the first mistakes we're going to dive into around launching is going to be about delivering too much information. So this is going to be almost like an inception episode where I'm going to talk about the 5 mistakes that people are making that are killing their launches. So this is an example for those of you paying attention to what we teach. This is an example of how to add value inside of someone's life without teaching them necessarily what to do. It's more focused on what to do, but it's more focused really around how to raise awareness to things you may not have been aware of. And what I want to raise your awareness to are 5 possible mistakes you're making right now that are killing your launches. So with that being said, if that's interesting to you, well, keep on listening.
Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about 5 mistakes that people are making right now that are killing their webinars. And these 5 mistakes are more messaging related, but a few of them are strategy related. But these are mistakes that I see over and over and over again. These are actually mistakes that I used to make all the time. I call these things brake pedals. And the reason why I call them brake pedals, and these are actually more focused on launch mistakes, not necessarily webinars. I always just use webinars and launches interchangeably because that's how I love to sell and launch, is through live presentations like webinars. But these are launch mistakes that most people are making that stop their launch from taking off, from seeing momentum. And these are what I call brake pedal things. And so the reason why we call them brake pedals is because I can teach you all day long what to do to launch, how to fix your launches, how to improve your launches, how to generate more sales. That's what I would call a gas pedal. Like, they can move you forward. But if you have your foot on the brake, it doesn't matter how many gas pedal things I tell you to do, you're not going to go anywhere. So if you're continuing to push on the gas and your foot's on the brake, you're literally not going to go anywhere. So this episode is dedicated to revealing what are these 5 things. What are these 5 brake pedal things so that you can stop doing them? And you guys have to understand that sometimes teaching people what to stop doing is just as important as teaching them what to do. So there are multiple ways to add value inside of your audience's life, inside of other people's lives, instead of just feeding them information over and over and over again. So I want to go through these 5 things with you on today's episode. Now, there's usually going to be 3 types of people that are struggling with their launches. If you are, you're usually the person who hasn't launched yet and you're not sure what to do. It seems overwhelming. Or maybe you're the person who has launched, but you haven't had a successful launch yet. Maybe you're the 3rd type of person who has launched. You've seen some sort of momentum, but now you're sort of stuck and plateaued. We've seen a lot of people in this category. And then we've also seen an increasing amount of people in this category, which is you've launched successfully, but your launches are not only plateaued, but they're actually declining. And that sucks. And so we've seen more people falling into that category lately as well. And one of the reasons why this is happening is because there are more and more people showing up, starting businesses, creating courses and programs where your messaging just has to be more lasered in. And what I always tell people is the reason why I stand out with what I do is it's not because I'm, super unique, trying to capture attention, dressing up in underwear and prancing around the internet. I'm not doing things for attention. I'm not reinventing the wheel totally. Like, I know that we have created things like thought reversals and stuff that are new and different. But the main reason why is because of how I talk. It's because of how I teach. It's how I communicate. It's that I understand how to add value inside of people's lives besides just delivering information. I know how to build connection. I know how to build the 3 types of trust that you need. So by the way, the 3 types of trust that you need are going to be, you need people to trust you as a person. So that's why connection content is so important. You need, and that's also what we would call the know, like, and trust. People need to trust your ability to solve their problem. Number 2, if they don't trust your ability to solve the problem, they'll never buy from you. And if you don't know what problems you solve for people, it's pretty impossible to gain their trust in your ability to solve the problem, right? Number 3 is they also need trust in their own ability to follow your process. Otherwise, they'll never buy from you. And that's why information and too much information can actually hurt you, because too much information can kill your launch because it puts people into overwhelm. So if you're the type of person who's like putting out content inside of your launch that's gold, or you know it's really good, it's information that took you years to gain, but you're getting a lot of comments like, thanks, this has been great, or thank you, so informative, or like, oh, this is awesome, I'm going to like just try to do this on my own first, or I have enough information just to get started, and they never buy, never return, chances are you're probably putting too much information inside of your content, inside of your webinars. You're over teaching, overcomplicating things. You're probably focusing so much on giving your best stuff away for free because you think, oh my God, if I just give my best stuff away for free, people will go and think, oh my gosh, I wonder what their paid stuff's like. And all that's resulted in is you overteaching and overwhelming people and getting them to lose trust in your process, but more importantly, their ability to follow your process. Because if they're overwhelmed, there's no way they're going to think they can follow your process. Okay. And that actually leads us into the very first brake pedal thing, which is delivering too much information. You have to understand that information by itself does not sell. We have to understand selling does not happen by delivering information. That's why encyclopedias are not designed as sales material. They're not designed to motivate or inspire or shift perspective or raise awareness. They're not designed to do any of that stuff. They're just there to inform and usually can probably overwhelm people. And so what we have to start looking at is the difference between an encyclopedia and like what a TED Talk is. A TED Talk's very informative. It's very engaging. It pulls people in. And at the end of a TED Talk, people would, if the speaker would have made an offer, people would probably buy. Now, I will say one of the most underrated things that we've done to improve our launches, and this is something that people just don't talk about enough, is that I became a better teacher. And what I mean by that is I don't rely on strictly delivering information in order to add value or in order to sell. I have learned how to teach in a way that makes a complicated issue very easy for people to understand, which messaging can be a hard, complicated process, but the way I break it down makes it very doable, manageable, digestible, and makes it feel possible. I also learned how to start removing conflicts in my teachings. And here's what I mean. If I make a statement, and just as an example, if I said something like, how-to content is one of the worst ways to build an audience online, right? That's one of the teachings I had in my launch. And I just moved on. There's a conflict now if you don't believe that. If you don't believe me, if you're subconscious saying, well, I heard this authority and this authority and this authority say that like how-to content is what to do. Guess what? I just created a conflict inside of your mind with my teachings. But if I said how-to content is one of the worst ways to add value and to build an audience online, look at Gary Vaynerchuk, Brene Brown, Simon Sinek. They all have amazing value that they're offering. They both all have huge audiences and huge engagement, and they're not delivering how-to videos over and over again. Well, now what I did is I took a possible conflict and I turned it into a, oh my gosh moment, a mind-blowing moment, a awareness-raising moment where your mind goes, boom, I never thought of that before. Oh my God. So instead of creating a conflict, I created an oh my God moment. I created a mind-blowing moment, and that's powerful. I became a better teacher. I became more engaging, more compassionate. I have a better understanding of who I'm speaking to and how to speak to them. I've become more persuasive. I've learned how to bridge from where my audience is to where they need to be. And so another example of what bridging is, and we did a whole episode on bridging a couple episodes ago. You guys can go back and watch that. But one of the reasons why people's launches are not performing is because they're getting to the solution way too fast. And people aren't even aware they need your solution, which makes you not relevant. It makes your whole launch not relevant to them. So here's what I mean. I've worked with a lot of parenting coaches, and a lot of parenting coaches, it's the problems that they solve is like, they have a lot of parents coming to them who are tired of having to yell to get their kids to listen. And after working with so many parenting coaches, what I've realized, and it's been really helpful for me as a parent, is that it's not that you have to yell at your kids. It's the reason why you're yelling is because you're triggered. You're getting triggered. They're not listening. You usually have a tone with them in the beginning. You ask them once or twice, you get triggered. You're probably busy. So you're easily getting triggered. You're getting stressed out. And the reason why you have a trigger is usually because there's some sort of like past trauma or something you haven't resolved yet. And then when you resolve that past trauma, you actually remain more grounded. The trigger doesn't exist anymore. You remain more grounded. And when you're more grounded, you actually have much better communication and connection with your child, which then gets them to listen better, and you don't have to yell. And I know this is true because I've been doing it with my own kids. Now, the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because I'm going to give you the example of the parenting coach. So what a lot of people are doing in their launches is they would be the equivalent of the parenting coach saying, hey guys, do you want to heal your past trauma so you stop yelling at your kids? And most parents will be like, what are you talking about? I don't want to heal my past trauma. I just want my kids to listen to me. So now what happens is, even though you as the coach know that that's the root cause, and that's the thing that needs to get addressed, and that's the solution, the audience doesn't know that yet. So what you just did is you made your training, your launch, your webinars completely irrelevant to them. So they're going to skip right past it. They're not going to opt in. They're not going to show up. They're not going to feel this need to show up. However, if I said something more along the lines of, hey, are you tired of going to bed every night feeling guilty that you yelled at your kids today and telling yourself, hey, I won't do it again tomorrow, yet you've been falling into that cycle for the last 6 months and you just don't know how to get your kids to listen to you without yelling, then this webinar is for you. And all I did there is I never once talked about the solution. I never once mentioned the solution. It was all about, where is my audience at? What are they literally doing? What are they literally thinking? And then what's going to happen is, during the webinar, during the launch, I will build a bridge to the solution, which actually I did here on the podcast. You remember how I said you yell at your kids, it's usually a trigger. That trigger happens because blah, 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 blah. Those were steps I was following to build a bridge so that you understood what was going on, but you can do the same thing. So you have to build a bridge to where your audience is, but most people just get right into the solution. And being a better teacher means being completely aware of where your audience is at. And then once you know where your audience is at, you can start to add value to them in a lot of different ways. So, becoming a better teacher is one of the best things I did. We have to start understanding that adding value doesn't mean just delivering information. You can teach steps. You can teach mistakes. You can make them aware of certain things. You guys can also, anytime you teach stuff, make sure that people understand it by using metaphors and stories and backing it up with counterexamples and showing the proof and things like that. Because you also have to understand what's going to happen is, when people start to consume or take in your information, what they're going to do is their mind's going to start to ask, how does this apply to us? How does this apply to me? How does this apply to our situation, our specific business? So anytime I teach content or get on this podcast, I know what's happening is your mind is already thinking, well, how does this apply to me? How do I start to use this? How do I adapt this to our business? Or how do I include this here? Or you're going to start to apply it to your specific scenario. And if you can't see, you don't have to figure it out, but if you can't see how this applies to your specific scenario, it's also going to be really hard for you to trust your ability to follow it. And that's why when you teach something, you should always back it up with a story or a metaphor so that it makes sense. The concept makes sense to them. Okay. So brake pedal number one is, you have to understand you're usually overwhelming them, but more higher level is, information doesn't help you necessarily gain all three types of trust, which again are the human to human trust. So they need to like you, who you are, your beliefs and your values. Number two, they need to trust your ability to solve their problem. And sometimes delivering information can do that. Sometimes it can. But there's more to that than just delivering information. There's more to gaining that type of trust. You actually have to demonstrate and understand that you have to demonstrate and show that you understand their actual problem. That's how they gain trust in your ability to solve the problem, is when they understand, or you show and demonstrate a complete understanding of what they're dealing with and why it's happening. And then number 3 is they need to trust their own ability to follow your process. And when you deliver too much information and you overwhelm them, they lose all trust in their own ability to solve the problem. Okay. Number 2 is that I see this all the time. In order to fix a launch, what most people do is they now move to a different strategy. Okay. So they move to a different strategy. So they go from like a webinar launch to a live launch to a 2-day workshop to a challenge to a video series or whatever it may be, thinking that the strategy was off. And I'll tell you, sometimes one strategy can be better for a certain business than the other one. But 9 times out of 10, strategy, if you have a broken launch, a strategy shift won't change the results. And here's what I'm talking about. If you gave me a challenge in order to launch, you said, Brandon, do a challenge launch. Guess what? I would make sales. If you said, Brandon, do a video series or do a webinar, do a live workshop, guess what? I would make sales. No matter what strategy you give me, I will make sales. Why? Because my messaging is dialed in. I know how to talk. I know how to sell. I know how to communicate. I know how to get those 3 types of trust. It doesn't matter the strategy I use, because my messaging and communication is going to be on point. However, if you gave me the best strategy in the world and I didn't know the messaging or the communication, I'm not going to make sales. So let's pretend for a second that your audience, and I'll give you some proof here and show you how and why this works. My audience is course creators. Okay. And I already know one of the biggest problems or fears and concerns and worries they have is that content takes up a lot of time, and they know their content has good information in it, and they're spending so much time working on it, but no one's watching it or engaging it. Okay. That's the problem. Okay. So course creators spending a lot of time creating content that they know is good, but no one's really watching or engaging with it. So I want you to imagine I created a headline and I decided to do a webinar launch. Okay. And the headline was how to create engaging content. Well, that would probably work, right? So how to create engaging content, that would probably work. But let's say I did another webinar, and instead of titling it how to create engaging content, I titled it how course creators can create engaging content in 5 minutes a day. How to create engaging content versus how course creators can create engaging content in 5 minutes a day. Which one do you guys think would do better? Number 1 or number 2? Probably number 2. Now keep in mind, it's the same strategy. It's still a webinar. So it's still a webinar and a webinar, right? But one is titled how course creators can create engaging content in 5 minutes a day. The other one's called how to create engaging content. Not only is the bottom one, or the second one, not only is that going to perform better, but it's going to also attract a much higher quality lead. Here's the reason why it's more effective. It has 3 triggers instead of just 1. The first title, how to create engaging content, has 1 trigger, which is benefit driven. How to create engaging content, create engaging content. That's the benefit. That's just 1 trigger. Now the bottom one, or the second one, how course creators can create engaging content in 5 minutes a day. It has 3 triggers in that. It has the identity of course creator. And anytime you use someone's identity, it's a trigger to get them to pay attention. It's a scroll stopper. Okay. So use their identity. Number 2, create engaging content. So number 2, create engaging content. That's a benefit driven. Both titles have the same benefit, but then we added in 5 minutes a day. That addresses the major pain point. Content takes too long. So there's 3 triggers in there: the problem, the benefit, and the identity. So it's the same webinar, but the same strategy, which is a webinar, but one is going to outperform the other. Now I want you to imagine what would happen if you use that style of messaging throughout your entire funnel or launch. Because this is just a headline. Imagine if that was in the ads, the emails, imagine that was in everything. How much more effective do you think your launches would be? Now, to take this one step further, I want you to imagine if you had a webinar titled how to create engaging content and it didn't do very well, and your messaging was very equivalent to that. And then all of a sudden you're like, I just need to do a video series now. And you did a video series or a challenge and you kept the title the same and the messaging the same, how to create engaging content. Do you think the results are going to be much different? Probably not. So when we see, or I see people just move from strategy to strategy to strategy, and I see it all the time. Like, you guys have to understand, we've done probably 800 sales calls over the last 12 to 18 months inside of our own business. And there are two main things that I see from people all the time when they're like, when they decide not to join our program, which is totally fine. But the two main reasons why they say no is because they want to try a different strategy. They're like, I need to just try I'm just going to try a different launch strategy, and then I'll see if that works first. And then the second thing we hear, which is brake pedal number 3, is that I'm just going to launch again. And I always ask them, well, why do you think this launch is now all of a sudden going to do better? Aren't you just doing the same thing again? And it kind of blows my mind. And I know there are some of you listening who have done that, where you're like, I just need to launch again. And you don't really change anything. You don't really change the language or the communication or the messaging. And you just keep going through the cycle of like launching with no results happening. My question to you is, why would it be any different? So stop doing the same thing over and over again and start doing different things. And everyone always goes to like, well, what do I change it to, Brandon? Well, obviously that's what we help you with inside of our programs, but without joining our programs, one of the easiest ways to do it is just look at the data. And what I mean by that is look at your past content. What content is performing the best? What topics are performing the best? Which teachings of yours are performing the best? Which stories of yours are performing the best? Which connection pieces are performing the best? And start incorporating more of that inside of your launches, inside of your teachings. And that will hopefully, it should increase the amount of engagement, show up rates, and sales that you start to see. So brake pedal for number 4 is something we've talked about already. But one of the things that people do in launches that kills their launches is they talk too much from solution. And it's okay to talk about solution. We need to talk about solution, but you don't want to do it right in the beginning. And some people just hop right into it. Some people even talk about it inside of their ad or the invite to the webinar. And it's freaking crazy to me. So we went through the parenting example, right? So instead of saying things like, hey, running an ad says, hey, parents, heal your past traumas and finally stop yelling at your kids and get them to listen. I think that's not going to work. That's all solution, right? So even when I work with students and I say, hey, what are the mistakes that people are making? And they go, well, they're not using this, this, and this. I'm like, stop saying that, because anytime you say they're not using, whatever you're about to say is all solution. I don't want to know what they're not doing. I want to know what they are doing. Like, let's get inside their head. Let's describe their situation. Let's describe what they're dealing with, what they're doing, what they're thinking, what are the mistakes they're making. Let's dive into all of that. So instead of saying, heal your past trauma, stop yelling at your kids, you're going to say something like, do you feel guilty every night because you yelled at your kids? And no matter how much you tell yourself you're going to do better the next day, it's just the same cycle over and over again. Why is that more effective? Because that's where they're at. They're not at the solution. And when I first started teaching messaging, I did this. I started saying like, hey guys, you want to fix your messaging? Your messaging is why your content's not working. And people are like, it didn't work. It wasn't relevant to them because no one knew what messaging was. No one was aware they had a messaging problem, just like parents aren't aware they have past trauma issues. And that's why they're yelling at their kids, right? And chances are no one is actually aware of the solution that you give in most cases. Some of you might, but most people aren't. And so for me, what I had to start doing when I first started teaching messaging is stop saying fix your messaging. And what I started doing is using language like, is your content really good? Has great information, but not getting the traction, not getting engagement on your content. And then my messaging started landing with people because that was the literal, actual, real problem that they had, that they were aware of. They were problem aware. They were aware their content wasn't working and it was good. They were not aware that their messaging was off. So instead of trying to convince them and explain to them their messaging was off, which is a very difficult road to go down, I just leaned into what are they aware of? What problems are they aware of? And I would lean into the problems they were aware of. So content not working, it's filled with great information. Oh my gosh, yes, that's me. And my messaging started working. Now, 5 to 6 years later, it's a different story. People are aware that they have messaging problems now. There's a lot more people aware that their messaging is off than before, but not everyone is. So sometimes I will run ads that talks about messaging. But even when I do, I have to explain what broken messaging looks like. So I'll say things like, hey, course creator, is your messaging off? Which means your content's not really working. People aren't showing up to your webinars aren't converting. So I still explain the symptoms of messaging being off. In fact, one of our best ads was literally called, the copy was like 5 signs your messaging is off as a course creator. And then I went through 5 actual real scenarios that would happen when your messaging is off, and people start to sit there and self-diagnose. Oh my gosh, yeah, that's me. Oh my gosh, I must have a messaging problem, right? And then sometimes I'll just run ads that say, want to fix your messaging, because people are aware of it, and just see how it does. But I still always provide the symptoms and the scenarios, real life, unwanted scenarios they're going through, because I don't want to talk about solution too soon. And I don't want to assume that people know what their problem is or what the actual root cause is. Okay. So now brake pedal number 5, our last and final one, is that, and I hate to say it, sometimes you guys are just not solving a big enough problem. Like you might find a problem that you solve, and you're like, okay, I'm going to focus on this problem and things like that. But it's not a problem people are really like wanting to pay for. They're okay just dealing with it. They'd rather just save their money and not deal with it. And so, a good example of this might be like, you might say it like, I help entrepreneurs organize their desk so they can be more productive. And it's like, well, is that really a big enough problem? Like, and you're like, yeah, I charge $1,000 for that. Like, I'm sorry, but I don't think people are going to pay $1,000 to learn how to organize their desk. They just aren't going to do that. So it's a very difficult path, right? So you have to ask yourself, well, what are my skills and knowledge? Put it in one column and start to ask yourself, what problems can I solve with these skills and knowledge? And which ones are the most relevant to the most amount of people and are painful enough? And so once you start to find out the problems that are most painful and the ones that are the most relevant, now you're on to something. And so sometimes we have to relook at, what are my skills and knowledge? What's the actual problem? So with the organization of the desk, you could say, well, what are my skills and knowledge? Can I organize something else? Yeah, I can help use the same philosophy to help organize offices, to help organize homes, to help organize. And then you start to ask, well, why is that important? Why do I need to organize someone's home? Like, well, because they have kids and their homes are messy every 5 minutes. And this is a problem for us, by the way, like having 3 kids in the house. My wife and I will clean the house and it'll be like spotless and amazing. And I'm not kidding you. Literally like 15 freaking minutes later, there's like toys, stuffed animals. There's like trash, from a snack left on the coffee table. And I was like, what the hell how did this get so dirty all of a sudden? So that's a big freaking problem. Like I would pay, money, like maybe $500 or $1,000 to learn how to keep the house clean and using those skills. So we have to find bigger problems. Sometimes we just aren't finding big enough problems, or we're not finding a problem at all, and you're focusing just on benefits. And remember, people have to trust your ability to solve their problem. If they don't trust your ability to solve the problem, it's going to be a really hard time getting them to buy anything. Okay. So those are the 5 mistakes that I see most people making when it comes to launches not working. So let's recap. Number 1, delivering information by itself doesn't sell, and in fact could hurt you building trust in the way you want to. Number 2 is that new strategies don't fix broken launches when your messaging is off. So focus on the messaging. Number 3 is launching again when the last launch didn't work and not changing anything isn't probably not going to lead to a successful launch. Number 4 is you're talking too much from solution. And number 5, you're not solving a big enough problem. So start fixing those. Stop doing those, and let's see if your launches start to increase, if you start to see an improvement on it. By the way, if you're curious on how do you actually start to fix this, what do you start to do? Well, once a month we like to do a workshop called Master Your Launch Messaging. And if anyone wants to ever come and get a private invite to that, you guys can always send us a DM on Instagram asking how to get an invite to Master Your Launch Messaging. We'd be happy to have you guys come on. And it's a 2-day event. So again, we don't spend a lot of time pushing and promoting it. It is more of a private thing. But if you guys ever feel like you want an invite to that, we try to do it once a month. So you can always DM us for an invite. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, leave us a review on iTunes. I love reading the reviews. And thank you guys for listening. And I'll see you next week. Take care.
Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested, and thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.